Welcome, everybody, to our very first Fireside chat with Malcolm's Anatomy Foundation. Malcolm's Anatomy is really dedicated to improving access to prosthetics, disability inclusion, and mobility support across Africa. And this is a first in our very important series to start creating conversations around these important issues with our partners, our stakeholders, and more importantly, with the individuals across Africa who have actually lost limbs. Tonight, I welcome Amu, who is the CEO and founder of NAVU Mobility. She and NAVU have won a number of awards around the years, two of the top ones being this Top Student Womanpreneur Award. And this year, 2026, she won the Startup Winner Award for the Holt Prize in South Africa. NAVU and Malcolm's Anatomy Foundation have partnered up to provide critical services to amputees across Africa. Welcome, Amu. Now, for me, it's really, really important that before we start talking all of the technical stuff and why ecosystems are important, that we find out a little bit about you. How did you start this journey in prosthetics, and what brought you to this place that you started NAVU?
Thank you so much for the warm welcome. Good evening, everyone. My story is not as interesting as a lot of people would think. I think building NAVU was a means to an end, a way to get access and get the amputees that I was serving to get the access to quality prosthetics that they needed, because I was not seeing that in the market. And so to recap, I did my undergraduate in the Eastern Cape at Walter Sisulu University, and I did it in medical orthotics and prosthetics, which is a clinical degree that allows me to service patients with amputations and orthotic needs. And during my degree, we had to meet at least 1,000 clinical hours required by the Health Professions Council. And I started realizing and noticing a frequent problem, and that was the access to prosthetics, particularly in South Africa. There is access in public hospitals. You will have NPOs and NGOs that are servicing people who don't have the money to afford high-end prosthetics. But what they have access to is actually of a very, very limited quality. And on top of that, people were really struggling to get back to the life that they had anticipated for themselves when they saw the pictures on the internet of what an amputee can achieve. A lot of people were not reaching those levels because the prosthetics that they had access to were just not designed for that. So it was really a problem that I started noticing in my undergraduate degree. And I did research then to sort of see and understand why exactly is it happening? What is it with prosthetics and prosthetic legs that is so difficult to replicate? And once, we started getting answers from people in the industry and from amputees, I realized that it was an opportunity to sort of scale this and take this into the market where people can get access to what they deserve.
That's amazing. And I mean, in your research that you have built out when you started NAVU, were there other challenges or misconceptions that people had around rehabilitation? I heard you say that they had a misunderstanding of what it would be like, how successful or mobile they'd be able to be after that. Were there other misconceptions that you picked up in this research?
So, I mean, a lot of people assume that rehabilitation is a nice to have. But actually, 64% of the world's amputees live in lower and middle income countries, right? That is a big demographic of people who need rehab. And so it isn't a nice to have. It is actually very much a fundamental problem that is happening in lower and middle income countries. That's the first thing. Number two, a lot of people assume that because prosthetics are already developed, right? They're big companies that are making a lot of prosthetics. They assume that, that it sort of translates then to access. I mean, they're robotic prostheses that can do incredible things that exist and are built and are sold. But that reality does not translate to the average person in Africa and South America, in Southeast Asia. The World Health Organization actually reports that 1 in 10 people cannot access assistive technology around the world. Now, if only 1 in 10 people, if only 10% of the population of people with disabilities are accessing these great technologies, what does that say about the great technology? That it is not used by the masses, right? It can be as amazing, it can be as revolutionary as you want, but if it is not being used and if it is not getting reach to 64% of the world's population of amputees, then you have a fundamental issue there. So I think the biggest misconception is that the problem of rehabilitation has already been solved. And I think that's far from the reality, right? The problem of rehabilitation has not been solved, not because the technology doesn't exist, but because technology then doesn't translate to access. And we can build and build and build all the robots that we want, but if people aren't using it, then you're leaving the people who you're building for behind.
And what do you think are some of those big contributors to that lack of access?
So I think there are a few systemic issues. I mean, off the top of my head, the first thing is the lack of companies that are building prosthetics in Africa in general, right? If you have a product that is designed far away from where a lot of people are expected to use it, you're going to have a few adoption issues. You're going to have problems with the workflow. How are clinicians in South Africa and Africa reaching their users? And is the product that you're building designed to accommodate that reality? So you find that there's a big contextual gap with the technology that is being developed and the kind of workflows that clinicians are having in prosthetics in low and middle income countries, right? So a lot of the time you find that these great technologies, they need to constantly be maintained all the time. And that's not going to happen, right? What's going to happen is if a patient, for example, travels around about 4 hours, and that's usually the average, travels around about 4 hours to get to a clinician, to get to their prosthetist, and they have to travel every 3 months to get to their prosthetist, they're not going to do that. What you're going to find is that prosthesis is going to break down and they're going to abandon it. And that's why we're seeing a lot of the abandonment issues. And so again, it's not that there's a problem with the technology, it's just that the adaptability to the realities of a lot of people who will be using it. The second thing is, prostheses that are, break down with dust, right? We live in areas with a lot of dust, a lot of humidity. And so if your technology is not built around that and constantly needs, some oil and grease in order to work in dust heavy areas, you're going to have a lot of problems. People are going to abandon it. So you find things like that, things like again, lack of clinicians, right? A lot of prosthetics clinicians are just not there. So a lot of clinicians are overburdened with the volume of patients that they have to service. And so you have these long waiting lists and people will just give up. People will give up. And now it's like a problem of when you get amputated, right? Who becomes your point of contact, right? Who helps you do the exercises? Who helps you make sure that your wound is healed? Who helps you make sure that your stump, your residual limb, is shaped properly? And from that, who tells you to go to a prosthetist? Because prosthetists aren't, widely known, right? And from there, when you do go to a prosthetist, who makes sure that you are doing the necessary exercises? So I think it's a very big systemic issue of from different phases of an amputee's life cycle, who is responsible in ensuring that those they have a hand to hold through every phase. And I think that's, a lot of the conversations that we've been having, in that companies should not just be developing products and then just dropping them in isolation in the market, but rather should be building ecosystems with the people who are already there and doing the work to enhance what's already existing.
I think I'd love to get to the point where we have a conversation how NAVU is going to, in your mind, fill this gap. But I think for a lot of people who don't understand that process from where an individual loses their limb to the point where they get a prosthetic, and the requirements and sort of the stages that go into that, and why that ecosystem is so important. So maybe just briefly take us through those steps so that we can understand what those kind of building blocks are to getting the individual to a point of mobility, and then we can have sort of circle back on how you see NAVU and this playing into this ecosystem.
100%. So I'll take you through the average journey of an above knee amputee, in a perfect world. Although we don't live in a perfect world, but ideally this is how it should go. When someone gets amputated, especially above the knee, before the amputation, the surgeon needs to explain, first of all, what the hell is going to happen. We found that a lot of people are so confused when they get amputated because no one takes the time to explain to them exactly what is about to happen. From that amputation, you go to the post-amputation rehabilitation is what we call it. It's a mouthful. But essentially, when you get amputated, there are things like phantom limb pain, for example, where because you've just chopped off a part of yourself, sorry for the crude language, but your body still has like psychosomatic reactions to that. So people will complain about like still itching, their amputated leg still itching, and them experiencing pain from that amputated leg. Now a lot of that is psychosomatic, right? The leg is not there, but the pain and the sensations still exist. So a lot of that goes with the psychological and physiotherapy, rehabilitation that comes in there. So you're supposed to be taking care of that wound very, very religiously. You're supposed to make sure that you do exercises every single day to ensure that you're not getting a contracture. A contracture is when the muscles, they shorten because you're not using them anymore. And we must also remember that when you're being amputated, like the muscles that were holding on to that lost leg have to go somewhere. And a lot of surgeons, depending on the kind of surgeon you have, will sort of attach it to whatever's left behind. And you as an amputee then need to get used to how that muscle is attached, how it feels, what is right feels like. And so it's a long process of self-discovery then, just as understanding how your leg now operates. And you also need to start putting weight on it. That's the biggest part, right? So after about 6-8 months, you need to start pressing on that suture, to make sure that to make sure that whatever is the residual limb can take the force of putting your weight on it again, because that is usually the biggest issue, right? Because with the foot, the foot is designed to take weight, but like when you have an above knee amputation, the residual section is not designed to take the weight of your body, so you need to start training it again. And all that requires rehabilitation professionals, right? So your prosthetist is there, your physiotherapist is there, your psychologist is there, your surgeon is there as well. And that is quite necessary when we as prosthetists then later on assess you for a prosthetic, for whether or not you qualify for a prosthesis. All those steps need to have been taken in order for you to be a good candidate for a prosthesis. Now we get to the thing where we get to the part where now you are fitted then and you're assessed for a prosthesis. Your stump needs to be in a specific shape, in like a cone shape, because research has shown that that is the best way that one, a prosthetic socket will be able to stick and stay onto your leg. And that is one of the biggest reasons why Maxine has left. But again, that is one of the biggest reasons why amputees never qualify for a prosthesis, because their stump is not properly shaped. And then you have like a few components like a prosthetic socket, a prosthetic knee, a pylon, a foot. All those things are assembled together to make a prosthetic leg. And when you start off, you get a very basic prosthetic leg, right? You can lock it, it only rotates in one axis to make sure that you are safe, and it's rotating in a way that is comfortable for a first timer. But that also is quite limited because you have in prosthetics you have K levels, right? So these are gradings where how you walk and how well you walk is determined by the clinician. And you get your first prosthesis, they're like training wheels. But then after that, you're supposed to get, a proper prosthesis to help you reintegrate back into your normal life, the life that you used to have. And that's usually then where problems start happening. Because one, the amputee was not properly rehabilitated. And so a lot of the time they don't qualify for a prosthesis to begin with. Or let's say they do qualify for a prosthesis and they're waitlisted. And now the dimensions and the socket capturing is delayed. And that's also a problem. But let's say you do get a prosthesis. A lot of people then will never actually graduate to the prosthesis that matches their activity level. And so now they're only able to walk within their house. And that leads to people abandoning their prosthesis. So it's really like a layered issue that we're finding in prosthetics, where amputees get let down on a layer of levels. It's never just one issue, but rather like a systemic attack on the well-being and rehabilitation of an amputee. Yeah. So I'm assuming that Maxine is going to come back. Malcolm, in the meantime, maybe we could take questions from people.
Yeah, while we're waiting for Maxine to join, I would like for you to give us a brief on the particular prosthetic knee you guys are working on. Maybe you could tell us about the name and why we feel this particular prosthetic knee is we can consider it an innovation when you compare it with the other ones we have currently.
Yeah. So the prosthetic knee that we're building is called the NK Gen 1. It's the NAVU knee first generation. It's a cool way of saying that. And we have essentially designed a polycentric prosthetic knee that rotates around four axes of rotation. This is basically a technical way of saying it rotates in a way that your natural knee would rotate. That's the first thing. And two, we've integrated shock absorption and we've integrated damping. These are technical ways of saying it can take a lot of the force that you experience as a person when you're walking, because usually that's done by your muscles. Hi, Maxine.
Sorry about that. You were like frozen on my side.
No, that's okay. So the damping is usually done by your muscles. So your muscles, they regulate that. But when you don't have a prosthetic leg, you need a component to do that. So we've integrated shock absorbers and springs to get you that damping, but also then to get you swing phase. So we know that with mechanical prosthesis, it's difficult for your leg, for your knee, for example, to perform in the way that a natural knee would perform. And that also means like exerting some force during certain phases of walking, and we've been able to recreate that with some springs. I would love to share an image, but because we're actually going through patent filing, we can't share the latest image of the NAVU knee. Please do follow along on our LinkedIn, because we will be launching a video that shows and explains the picture of the NAVU knee. I can imagine, yeah. So I'll share an image once we've submitted that patent filing. But also then we've been able to make it a fraction of its functional equivalent. So the way that our prosthetic knee would be categorized is actually as a high performance knee. And in the market right now, you can get high performance knees from $2,000 upwards. So we've been able to really then be priced at a fraction of that, which is we're working to price it at around $400. But also the primary customer is going to be clinics, right? So we won't be selling to individuals, but rather clinics and NPOs and NGOs. And we can even then subsidize that price even further with, a higher volume of sales. So we're really looking to make it more as accessible as possible to as many amputees as we can. But also then making it highly functional and usable and durable for the different contexts that Africans find themselves in. We've also tried to design it in a way that it's so easily manufacturable that we can scale up production to different countries. We've used manufacturing techniques and that are easily accessible in any country. So things like laser cutting rather than CNC manufacturing for a lot of our components is how we've also then been able to make it affordable, because our manufacturing techniques are really quite accessible and easily scalable.
So the intention is that across Africa, there could be a variety of places that could make it and have or easy sort of accessibility to all the equipment that's actually required for that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we've also, sorry.
No, go.
So we've also then just made it repairable. If there are any of you who are clinicians here, you will understand that prosthetics are actually not repairable. You cannot repair prosthesis if there's anything that happens to it, whether it wears down, whether it you have like a bearing or a rubber that needs to be replaced, you need to buy a new one. We've actually removed that design principle in our product and made it so that you can easily repair it, so that you can keep the product for longer, and we can also integrate sustainability into our practice.
You talked earlier about people having to come in, travel long distances to come in and to maintain their prosthesis. And sorry if I missed this in my little bit of a downtime, but I assume that what you've made is a lot more durable. How often would people have to come in from a maintenance perspective with your new product?
So we've tried to make it so that you don't need to maintain it for at least 3 years. We are using international standards to do durability testing for our product to make sure that you don't have to repair it for at least 3 years. And when you do need to replace it, it's usually going to be like the bearings, the rubber that makes sure that it rotates smoothly. And that is like only after 3 years.
Amazing. So you spoke a lot. I know you and I have had a conversation before, and you're looking at sort of the prosthetic knee, but you were explaining to me how prosthetics is really a plug and play kind of process in terms of what you add on. Talk to me a little bit about that, because that leads us into a broader conversation around ecosystems and why these ecosystems are so critical to accessibility across Africa.
So with prosthetics, you really have components similar to a bicycle, right? Like a bicycle is not like one single thing. You have a wheel, you have the body, you have the brakes. and then whoever can bring it together to make a full bicycle. So in clinics, in prosthetics clinics, you cannot just give someone a full leg. There are different components that you bring together as a prosthetist or a clinician upon your prescription. So it's really like a plug and play. You have a knee, you have a pylon, you have a foot, and you give people different types of feet, different types of knees, depending on, you know, the kind of activity level that they have, the age that they have, you know, what they want to do with the prosthesis. You have sporty knees, you have, you know, regular knees, you have swimming knees, you have skiing knees, you know, depending on where you live. But it's really, you know, a plug and play. And that's the great part about the prosthetics industry, is that you can have a catalog. You can go, you know, as on and on and on, as I mean, as many limbs as they are in the human body, you can have a prosthetic limb for that, except, you know, your head or something.
I don't know. I think there are a couple of people that could do with a prosthetic head. So we've spoken a lot, and I think that brings us naturally to this conversation around ecosystems, and why it's important. And we've heard that it's not just about the prosthetic, but about the care beforehand. It's a broader conversation than just fitting a prosthetic and what happens in the process of actually producing that. And I think this is a really key conversation for us to start having. And one of the reasons why we're doing this fireside chat is to really raise awareness that this is not a one size fits all and it just happens, that there's a real process that takes place in here. And I think you've highlighted those areas really well for us. And so from your perspective, why is it so important that governments and professionals and healthcare organizations and NGOs like ours come together and work together in partnership to build out this ecosystem when it comes to helping people who have lost limbs?
I think for a number of reasons. The most important one is because health should not be determined by someone's socioeconomic situation. Fundamentally, it is unfair and it is unjust for people to not be able to do something as fundamental, as basic as walking, because they were born in a certain socioeconomic situation. As people, we should not accept that as the norm. And I think that's the first point of contention, that as, you know, people within rehabilitation, people within the health profession, we should be working towards ensuring that because someone is amputated does not mean that they, you know, their life is over. And you really see that with a lot of African amputees, that they know that because of their socioeconomic background, their life is functionally over if they become amputated. And we need to change that. And the way to change that is by building on the infrastructure that already exists in different contexts. As a company, as a startup, we are fully aware that there are people who've been doing this for a very long time. And the people who have experiential knowledge when it comes to building prosthetics for people. And our job then is not to replace that knowledge, and it's not to, like, you know, just get rid of it completely. Our job is actually to plug into that knowledge to say, how can we grow what already exists? How can our products build on existing, you know, frames of knowledge and frames of understanding? And I think then that's how ecosystems are built, right? You have different organizations like Malcolm's Anatomy, like, you know, government hospitals, like public clinicians, like private clinicians, who have a vested interest in ensuring that people with amputations get their prosthesis, right? We all have the same end goal. Now, how can we work together to make sure that the work that we're doing is building on itself? Because unfortunately, solving the problem of accessibility in prosthetics is not just going to be a solution that needs one product. It's and we are not delusional enough to believe that the NAVU knee is going to solve all
Change
issues
the world.
literally, right? It's going to solve all issues when it comes to access. But the point is, if the NAVU knee is in the market and you have Malcolm's Anatomy that comes in and helps amputees access the NAVU knee, right? And we have collaborations with other prosthetic manufacturers who give the leg and the foot, and we say, well, that's a whole prosthesis right there, right? And you have access to the people, and from that access to people, we say, okay, well, here's another physiotherapist that is ensuring that they're making sure that people are ready for their prosthetic leg and training them to make sure that they qualify for that. Like it's a whole process, right? And each and every one is plugging into that process instead of like working in silos. I think that's quite important because one, a prosthetic is a system. A prosthetic leg, a prosthetic arm is a system, and it doesn't function on its own. But then also rehabilitation is the system and doesn't function on its own. I think you can make that analogy for us building the NAVU knee, or people trying to facilitate access to rehabilitation. It's really critical that we are building on top of existing systems, and that we also align our objectives to make sure that we have a much bigger impact.
And how are you finding conversations with partners in this space around this concept of building an ecosystem, having one goal, driving accessibility within Africa? Is it an easy conversation, or are you sort of spearheading something that has been coming for a while?
So I think this is a layered question, because there are people who have interest in keeping the system as it is. And that's always the case, right? They're gatekeepers. But I found that a lot of people, more than the majority of people, actually do want to build in systems, right? And there's so many people doing incredible work, and it's like, well, I can help with that, right? We can help with that. And so I mean, really, I found that one, when you're trying to build an ecosystem, you always need local owners, right? You need, if we are producing a product for Africa, right? We don't just need people who are representing, South Africa, Nigeria, Botswana. We need people who are representing Cape Town and Lagos and, Kinshasa. And we need people who are on a more local level, and even lower than that. The way that you build should not be like on a very high level, right? Because then you risk becoming generic, and you risk becoming irrelevant and obsolete. So we've also found that in approaching ecosystem partners, we should be varied in our approach, right? How we approach should be very varied. You don't start with like the national government. You start with, sort of the local clinic, and you build a collaboration with the local clinic, and they, connect you with the next local clinic and the next one. And then before you know it, you're going to the provincial level, and you're going to the national level. And that's been really our approach, to say, it's much easier to eat this elephant bit by bit. and approach partners with that mindset.
Like from the bottom up.
Yeah.
What really excites you?
I found that also, like, people are really deterred by these big ambitions, right? Like, people do not want to hear you say, oh, we're going to change the world, because obviously it feels like a scam. But if you approach people from a more like individual level, to say, okay, well, I see that you're having a problem with X, Y, and Z patient. I can help you with X, Y, and Z patient. It's a much easier conversation, right? Instead of saying, we're going to change the lives of 1 million amputees around this country. Do you want to come along?
And I suppose you're proving your point, right? Because you're actually making a difference in those 3 or 4 or 6 people, and then moving on to the next 3 or 4 or 6 people, and gradually you are making a significant impact on the population that actually needs it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'd really like to open the floor to get some questions from people, but one last question before I move on to that, and then after, I'm going to give the floor kind of 10 minutes to ask you any questions I have, and then I'm going to come back and wrap this up with you. But what excites you most about the future of prosthetics innovation on this continent?
Man, I think we have a lot of great researchers, and we have a lot of great, you know, clinicians that are doing the work, right? And you have organizations like Malcolm's Anatomy, being led by young people. And so I think the movement is young, it is hungry, it is ambitious. And the way that we're approaching problems is really looking at it from a more sustainable, mindset. And that really excites me. I think if we continue to build innovations and to build our businesses based on a fundamental understanding of the people we're building for, because I think people underestimate really how amazing it is to be a young African, right? You are, bombarded with problems. And that is actually the source and the core of all innovation problems.
Absolutely.
So the fact that we, are in a market and in an industry that has so much room and space for growth is truly an exciting opportunity for us. We have these great, augmenters such as, AI, obviously we can go into detail about its implications, but we have, these great policies coming into place, Africa Free Trade Agreement. We have a lot of, innovations that are coming in to streamline payments so that even if you are, a Kinshasa-based innovation, a Lagos-based innovation, you can still have transactions around the continent. We are, the ground is fertile for priming. And I think if we continue approaching the problems with the refusal to accept injustice, we're going to get somewhere. We're genuinely going to get somewhere, and the time for waiting for imported solutions is over. We really should aim for technological sovereignty as a continent, and that's what I'm seeing, and I'm excited.
That is incredible. Right, so I'm going to open the floor to some questions. Give it about 10 or so minutes. Does anybody have anything they'd like to ask Amu? I want to just open my chat window. Nothing. The world is a silent place. When they teach you how to facilitate at the start of a session, and then they say you mustn't fill the silence, you must count until 10, and somebody will fill the silence for you.
That's true.
So I'm going to count in my head until 10, but I have Esther. Hi, Esther. How are you doing?
Afternoon. Yeah. Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much for your session. It was really, really interesting and inspiring. I don't have a question actually. I just want to comment on some of the things that you said, and also to just appreciate the work that you're doing at NAVU. Listening to you as a practicing prosthetics and orthopedics here in Nigeria, I understand, especially when you mentioned, how a lot of amputees think that their lives have ended after they have an amputation. I could relate to it so much. A lot of people would often tell surgeons, instead of amputating me, I think I want to die. And it's really, really sad to see those kind of things happening. And seeing that after the amputation, there are no aftercare, and a lot of them do not even have access to prostheses afterwards because of the cost. So like I just want to appreciate the work that you're doing, and I hope that it's going to, actually become the solution that you are really to be, especially for us here in Africa. So yeah, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much
Thanks,
for that.
Esther.
I want to pose sort of a challenge to you to say, what exactly does your ecosystem need? What's the most pressing issue that you're seeing as a prosthetist in Nigeria?
Okay, so you have actually mentioned quite a number. I feel like it's the same thing across all of Africa. So for a lot of amputees, right, the aftercare. So you mentioned how surgeons, when they do the amputation, they don't make the stum to look good enough for a prosthesis. I've had a lot of cases like that where amputees come and their stum is a problem to be fitted into the prosthesis. So that's one thing that has been very, very occurrent, that you see a lot of storms and they're not good or like able to fit into processes. So even when you fit them, you try to fit them because you want them to be able to work. These amputees experience a lot of pain and discomfort. Like we've had issues like that a lot of amputees, and then at the end of the day, some of them, if they are, especially if they are quite older, they do not use the prosthetic for a long time. The younger ones will still push through and just use it because they need to, go to work and return to the activities of daily living. So they just have to continue bearing the pain. But that's something that has really been a concern for me. The fact that they'll call you and tell you, oh, we have this discomfort, and you know that there is nothing you can do as a processes. And obviously you cannot tell them to go for another surgery because that would, be another discussion and conversation. So that happens, and then the cost. There are a lot of people, there are some orthopedic hospitals, especially general hospitals that have applications every other day, and then these people just they get the applications and that's it, they just go home. So they don't afford the processes. Sometimes maybe NGOs can offer them the help, or maybe family if they have well-to-do family members. So there is no actual government policy that helps them, at least supports them to be able to get some sort of help when it comes to processing. So that's a very, very big issue that has not, been on the table a lot of times here in Nigeria, where amputees cannot get the support that they need, especially if it comes out of pocket. And we know how expensive. You mentioned how much like a typical knee joint will cost about $2,000, and that's a whole lot for some people. Like some people have not even finished studying for thinking about getting prosthesis. So that cost, the cost, of processes, the pain that they feel from, the amputation and then the rehabilitation afterwards. So you also mentioned that it's something that is very, very popular here, where after you have fitted the processes for an amputee, they come for training. We train them for a couple of times, but the follow up is not always, very consistent. Follow up is not something that, and that's not, it's not the fault of the prosthetic, it's not the fault of the patient. It's just how the system works, right? Sometimes follow up takes about 2 weeks. Um, if it's maybe the patient is really old, they might keep coming for like a month. But after that, they just, go, people that drop theirs just drop their processes. Those who just, feel like it's not necessary to continue to go about their life and all of that. So follow up is something that is also an issue because these people need that psychological support. I've had to walk a lot of my patients through, the psychological path, even as a perspective, because they probably just came directly from the hospital. They didn't have to pay physiotherapy, they didn't pay psychologists, they cannot afford that. Now you have to fit into all those shoes. So you have to be the physiotherapist, you have to be the psychologist that will help them to move through the rehabilitation process. So yeah, those are some of the challenges that are really common among a lot of Nigerian processes here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Super, super informative.
Opportunity to learn from other countries as well, which is amazing. And I think that's a great link to Malcolm's anatomy and their sort of access to Africa in general. So great. I have a question on the chat from Salome. If you could change just one thing in the ecosystem, what would it be and what might the impact be? She also has a second question, but I'll come to that when you've answered this one.
Okay. If you could change one thing in the ecosystem, what would it be and what might the impact be? What is the biggest bottleneck? if I could change one thing in the ecosystem, I would make sure that there are more prosthetists. That's what I would change. I would increase the number of prosthetists tenfold. Because and not just increase it, but ensure that they have the knowledge on how to operate in resource constrained areas, because a lot of the time prosthetists will just say, this is not what I learned during my undergrad, and it's just a bit too much, and leave it at that. And so I would really change it, and the impact would be that we have a lot more people that are following up on these amputees. Two, we have a lot more people that are available to actually traveling to a lot of where amputees are living. Because another thing is, if you expect people to travel somewhere in order to get something that is so important, they will find ways to do without. So you need to be able to then get that care to them, as close to them as possible, right? They shouldn't be traveling for over an hour to get your follow-up, right? And waiting for 2 hours. Like, I know in South Africa, for example, like it's not abnormal for a patient to travel like for a day. They get a bus, a hospital arranged bus that leaves at like 5 a.m. It travels 5 hours to get to the hospital. They go to their appointment at the hospital, and let's say the bus will leave only like a few hours after their appointment because it has to wait for everyone else, and then they travel another 5 hours back to go home. Right? By the time they're home, it's already night, and they left their house at like 4, 3 a.m. So obviously, I can't expect a patient to be able to travel like consistently in that way. It's exhausting. It's demoralizing, and it's actually it strips away your dignity. And so yeah, that would be the biggest thing. More prosthetists, more localized care. What is the biggest bottleneck in achieving my vision? The biggest bottleneck is getting to as many people as possible. Right now, we are applying to the South African regulator for medical devices so that we can legally sell our product. But once we've done that, right, that we can do, but we need to get to people, and we need to get to people in a way that is sustainable and in a way that actually helps them. So the biggest bottleneck is really finding a way to get to as many people in a way that is sustainable and in a way that isn't just feeding into a festering issue. Yeah.
Lots of mountains to overcome in that sense. And I picked up that also a change needs to happen around education, and how we are educating prosthetists during that university point to help them to think differently about how to apply this in a sort of continent that has a lot of different challenges to the rest of the world. Any other questions from anybody? Right, moving on. This partnership with Malcolm's, what do you envision this is going to help in terms of, or where's the joint vision in this partnership that you want to highlight, and how is it building out this ecosystem that you envision?
Man, I think my biggest hope for this partnership is that we're able to facilitate access, right? We build, and our biggest advantage is that we're a group of builders who, are building technical components that will be affordable and accessible. Now, Malcolm's Anatomy, they're enablers, right? They're system enablers. And when you have a builder and an enabler, that's when you are able to reach. And I think that's my biggest hope, to say we've been able to facilitate reach with our partnership, and we're able to get to as many people as possible, and to hopefully then have conversations, meet people that we otherwise would not have been able to meet at the southernmost tip of Africa, right? It's that thing of you want partners in every part of the continent in order to, spread our reach as wide as possible.
If you could leave us and the audience with one message about mobility, independence, inclusion, what would that message be this evening?
Man, mobility is dignity, and dignity shouldn't be determined by where you were born. The idea that you need to be rich to walk is so deeply flawed, and we should be working towards changing that. People with amputations are brilliant. I've met some of the smartest people, and the only thing separating them between you and me is just that something horrible happened. And it's our responsibility then to create innovation that moves you. And it's our slogan, but it's real, right? It literally moves you towards the life that you want for yourself. We are building to be obsolete so that someone actually never has to think about NAVU, right? Because our products will enable them to live a life where they don't have to think about their disability every waking moment.
Yeah. And sort of, I think part of that big disability, particularly in Africa, is helping individuals who are generally breadwinners, allow them that ability to support their families again. And I think giving that, there is dignity and movement, but there's also that ability to look after my family, look after the people around us. And I think that's really real in an African context, where you have breadwinners with a number of aged individuals or children at home that they are supporting, and giving people the access to be able to gain that the mobility that they need to be able to support their families is, I think, really critical in our country, and particularly in South Africa, but I think probably across Africa as well.
Yeah, exactly.
It has been incredible talking to you. I think we will probably have another session. You and I think we haven't even touched on some of the conversations that we can possibly get to and deep dive into. But it has been a pleasure having you join us. We are fortunate to have you as a partner, and I think our alignment is critical for Africa in terms of what we are trying to achieve. I know this is our first fireside chat, and I am looking forward to engaging with other stakeholders and other people that need to be a part of this ecosystem, and part of taking this journey forward in terms of how we can provide access to everybody, not just those on a particular level, but to everybody. So I want to thank you for joining us this Thursday evening. Thank you to everybody who joined us online. The room is still open for a couple of minutes. Amu, I know you wouldn't mind staying on. If anybody would like to stay on and have a quick chat with Amu, I know she'd be available until 6 o'clock because we still have a couple of minutes. But what a pleasure to have hosted all of you. And I look forward to welcoming you back to our next fireside chat in the next couple of weeks or so.
So excited. I'll be sitting in the audience with the next one.
Yeah. So. And asking questions this time.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, I need to speak to that person about this. How to build out a network across Africa.
Exactly.
Amazing.
Exactly.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening.
And people can contact me on LinkedIn as well if you're too shy.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Amu. Truly appreciate your time.
Yeah. But I mean, the hour just passed by so quickly. My goodness.
I think we've achieved a building out some idea of where our vision is going. And I think that's so
Yeah.
important.
Exactly.
And I chatted to you on Monday and I still learned new stuff this evening.
Exactly.
Awesome. So when are you likely to get feedback on your prosthesis? Is it soon?
Yeah, so we're looking over the next 3 months. That will
Wow.
be when we submit our data and we get feedback on our application. But the patent application will be able to we'll be able to share pictures and everything the moment we file it. Once we filed it, then we can share because
Then
it's
you can share.
provisionally protected. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay, is that how it works? So once you've
Yeah.
put it in, it's provisionally accepted. Okay.
Yeah. Not
And in the
accepted, but protected. So
but
if they reject
protected.
it, then
Oh,
like
okay.
that thing is
Oh,
gone.
then it
But
doesn't actually. Okay.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Amazing. So a lot of advocacy kind of work at the moment as well, I'm assuming.
Yeah, no, we are really trying to build. So we're actually trying to build an ecosystem, trying to build relationships with existing clinicians in South Africa. So we are planning on another, webinar with that is CPD accredited. So CPD, continuous professional development points,
Development.
that so that like clinicians can also we can create educational opportunities for clinicians to sort of learn and talk about the problem in different ways. And we can sort of brainstorm how we can grow and expand NAVU's solution to being more than just about one product, but actual problems that actual people are experiencing.
Amazing. And is your intention to build out more prosthetic units or different types or?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, over the next 5 years, we do see our product offering expanding. We first want to get our first product in the market to say, and then we like basically suss out the demand, right? We want to see how many units we can sell in a month, in a year, and then build our second product or collaborate with innovators that are already building products, and we license their technology to commercialize, to say, well, the people, we are essentially like the biggest, or the prosthetic component producer of choice in Africa. That's the goal.
That's the goal. That's what are those audacious, hairy goals, I think is what they call them.
Yeah, those are like more like the 10-year plans.
The 10-year plans on this.
The
That's
10-year
amazing.
plans, yeah. No, we really are already chatting to a few researchers in South Africa who are already developing like other prosthetic technology that is so cool. And so we're seeing probably in the next 2-3 years, we'll probably license out some of their technology and grow our product offering.
Watch the space. You will be
Watch
back.
the space.
Amazing. Everybody,
Watch
thank you so much for your time this evening. What a pleasure to engage with everybody and have a wonderful evening.
All right.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.